To the world, Cher is an icon of resilience, a singer, actress, and cultural force who has reinvented herself more times than most people change careers. She has conquered Broadway, rock radio, film festivals, and dance clubs, all while maintaining an image of unbreakable control. But behind the glittering costumes and the powerhouse vocals lies a much messier, sadder private story. At the center of that hidden narrative is her youngest son, Elijah "Blue" Allman. Born into staggering wealth and legendary talent, Elijah's life has been defined not by opportunity, but by absence. From a chaotic infancy sandwiched between his parents' toxic marriage to a lonely childhood spent in boarding schools, and later a harrowing adult life marked by near-fatal addiction and legal battles with his own mother, Elijah's journey is a stark reminder that fame and fortune cannot purchase emotional safety. Today, his story is one of ongoing crisis, a heartbreaking, slow-motion tragedy that has unfolded under the glare of Hollywood's brightest lights. Elijah "Blue" Allman entered the world on July 10, 1976, at a moment when his parents' relationship was already collapsing under its own weight. His mother was Cher, fresh off her divorce from Sonny Bono and desperate to be seen as a serious artist rather than just one half of a kitschy television duo. His father was Greg Allman, the soulful, haunted frontman of the Allman Brothers Band, whose genius was inextricably tied to a ferocious appetite for heroin, alcohol, and cocaine. They married in 1975, just 4 days after Cher's divorce from Sonny was finalized, in a Las Vegas ceremony that felt less like a romantic beginning and more like a grenade waiting to explode. In his memoir, My Cross to Bear, Greg Allman recalled that their first official date was the worst in the history of mankind, yet they were drawn together by a volatile mix of physical attraction and mutual damage. Elijah was conceived during one of their reconciliations, but by the time he was born, his parents had already filed for divorce, only to withdraw it, then refile again. This pattern of breaking apart and patching up became the backdrop of his infancy. For a child, the absence of stability is its own form of violence, and Elijah's cradle was rocked by arguments, relapses, and lawyers. The marriage finally shattered for good when Elijah was still a toddler. Cher has often recounted the defining moment. Greg picked up her daughter, Chastity Nouchez Bono, from school but got lost, stopped at a bar, and forgot how to get home. For Cher, that was the line. She later explained that she left not because she stopped loving Greg, but because she didn't want the kids to be around it. That decision, while necessary for safety, created a new kind of fracture. Elijah would now be shuttled between two unstable poles, a mother consumed by a relentless work ethic and a father who was physically present only intermittently, lost to the fog of addiction. From the very beginning, Elijah Blue was loved, but love, as he would learn, is not the same as being seen. It is not the same as having a parent who shows up every night for dinner. It is not the same as feeling anchored. As Cher's career exploded in the late 1970s and 1980s, with television specials The Heart of Stone Tour and her Oscar-winning turn in Moonstruck, she was rarely home. Elijah was raised primarily by a rotating roster of nannies and house staff. While he never wanted for material things, the emotional architecture of his childhood was hollow. When he was just 7 years old, Cher made a decision that she likely believed was practical, but which Elijah would later describe as devastating. She sent him to boarding school. In interviews years later, he spoke with a raw, unguarded pain about that experience. When you go to boarding school at 7 years old, he told the Daily Mail, it's kind of hard to feel like you're not being shunned. He added that while he was making peace with it as an adult, that didn't change the essential truth. It's still wrong to do that. That word, shunned, is powerful. It suggests not just loneliness, but a sense of exile, of being deliberately placed out of sight. For a young child, being sent away by a famous, busy mother can feel less like protection and more like punishment for existing. Boarding school did not provide the structure Cher had hoped for. Instead, it stripped Elijah of any remaining sense of belonging. He was moved from school to school, including a brief and traumatic stint at a military academy meant to correct behavioral problems. Far from being disciplined, Elijah found himself unsupervised and adrift during holidays and breaks. He has spoken openly about how, at the age of 11, he would return to New York City during school vacations and wander the streets of Harlem with friends, buying marijuana and ecstasy. It seemed normal at the time, he recalled, but there is nothing normal about an 11-year-old experimenting with hard drugs while his mother is performing for thousands of adoring fans and his father is in and out of rehab. This early exposure to substances was not a phase, it was the planting of a seed that would grow into a poisonous tree. By his early teens, Elijah was already using drugs not just recreationally, but as a form of escape from the persistent ache of parental absence. His relationship with his father, Greg Allman, remained a ghost throughout his youth. Greg was a legend, a man whose voice could crack granite. But he was also a severely addicted individual who struggled to maintain any consistency. There were moments of warmth, guitar lessons, glimpses of what a functional father might look like, but they were fleeting, always interrupted by the next relapse or tour. Elijah has described feeling like he had to compete with heroin for his father's attention. When Greg died in 2017 from complications of liver cancer, Elijah lost not just a parent, but the possibility of ever fully resolving that wounded relationship. The tragedy of Elijah's childhood is that he was orphaned in slow motion. His mother was gone working, his father was gone getting high, and Elijah was left to raise himself in the empty spaces between their two enormous competing egos. As a young man, Elijah tried to carve out his own identity through music. In the late 1990s, he formed the industrial rock band Dead Z, adopting the stage name P. Exeter Blue. Dead Z was a carefully constructed artistic project, complete with a fictional universe called the Undercore, where each band member represented an archetype like science, medicine, or war. Elijah wore all white, symbolizing the academy. It was ambitious, weird, and genuinely creative. But no matter how elaborate the concept, the press could not resist framing him as Cher's son. Critics dismissed Dead Z as a vanity project, a rich kid's hobby funded by a famous mother. The 2002 album Commencement earned a small cult following, but mainstream success remained just out of reach. For Elijah, this was a familiar kind of pain. He was trying desperately to be seen for his own talents, but the world kept looking past him to the woman who gave him birth. The industry that should have been his proving ground became another stage for his sense of invisibility. It was on the road with Dead Z that Elijah's casual teenage drug use metastasized into full-blown addiction. Touring life offered the independence he had always craved, but it also removed whatever fragile guardrails remained. He later admitted that he was self-medicating to cope not just with industry pressures, but with the persistent echoes of his boarding school years. Heroin, in particular, became a dark salvation. In one heartbreaking interview, he confessed that heroin kind of saved me. If I didn't have that at that point, I don't know what I would have done. You may jump off a bridge. This is not the language of a thrill seeker. It is the language of a person in such profound emotional pain that they are willing to embrace a substance that could kill them simply because it makes the agony stop. By the mid-2000s, Dead Z went on hiatus, and Elijah's carefully constructed identity collapsed. Without the band to anchor him, he fell deeper into dependency. Paparazzi photos from this period are jarring. A disheveled man, using a cane, looking decades older than his age. The contrast with his mother's polished image could not be starker. In 2005, Elijah faced another cruel twist. He contracted a severe case of Lyme disease, reportedly while traveling in India. The illness left him bedridden, exhausted, and in chronic pain. But when he tried to explain his condition, he was met with disbelief, even from his own family. He later told the Daily Mail that during those dark hours, "You absolutely need unconditional parental love." That was lacking from that direction. He sought expensive alternative treatment in Germany, but the damage was done. The Lyme disease compounded his existing health problems and deepened his reliance on painkillers, creating a vicious cycle where legitimate illness and substance abuse became nearly impossible to untangle. In 2013, Elijah married singer Mariangela Queenie King, the frontwoman of the band King. They met on a blind date in Cologne, Germany, and quickly eloped. Notably, Cher did not attend the wedding, a pointed absence that spoke to ongoing family tensions. For a brief period after returning to the United States, the couple lived with Cher, but the arrangement soon soured. The marriage, like so much in Elijah's life, mirrored patterns of chaos and reconciliation. They separated in 2020, filed for divorce, then attempted a reconciliation 2 years later. But the relationship remained volatile, intersecting with family conflict and legal battles that would soon become very public. The most shocking chapter in Elijah's adult life unfolded in late 2023. During divorce proceedings, Mariangela made an explosive allegation. She claimed that while she and Elijah were trying to reconcile in a New York City hotel room, four men entered the room and physically removed Elijah at the direction of his mother. Cher immediately denied the specifics to People magazine, saying that rumor is not true. However, she did not deny that some form of intervention had taken place. Whether or not the story was exaggerated, it painted a deeply troubling picture. A mother so desperate to save her son that she was willing to use what looked like paramilitary tactics, and a son so resistant to help that he experienced the intervention as a kidnapping. It was a scene of pure dysfunction, a family drama playing out not in a therapist's office, but in a public hotel corridor, witnessed by strangers. Just weeks later, in December 2023, Cher took the extraordinary legal step of filing for a conservatorship over Elijah's estate. In court documents, she claimed that her son was substantially unable to manage his financial resources due to severe mental health and substance abuse issues. Her attorneys argued that any money Elijah received from a trust established by his late father, Greg Allman, would likely be immediately spent on drugs, leaving him at risk of homelessness or death. The battle became public and bitter. Elijah opposed the conservatorship, filing his own legal papers stating that while he had struggled with addiction, he was not mentally ill and did not need his mother controlling his finances. He wrote that he had been attending AA meetings and had maintained several months of sobriety. In early 2024, a judge denied the temporary conservatorship, citing insufficient evidence of an urgent emergency. The case dragged on through legal wrangling until September 2024, when Cher voluntarily dismissed her petitions after mediation. For a moment, it seemed the worst might be over, but the respite was short-lived. In mid-2025, Elijah was hospitalized after an apparent overdose in Southern California. Law enforcement responded to a call about erratic behavior and found substances inside his residence. Paramedics transported him for emergency treatment. Months later, photographers captured Elijah outside the Chateau Marmont in Los Angeles, looking gaunt, disheveled, and leaning heavily on a cane. The images went viral, sparking a fresh wave of public concern. Sources close to the family told media outlets that Elijah's struggles with addiction had never truly abated, and that friends had recently found heroin and fentanyl at a property where he had been staying. It was a grim reminder that recovery is not a straight line, and that for some, the pull of oblivion is stronger than any intervention, legal order, or mother's plea. What makes Elijah Blue Allman's story so heartbreaking is not just the litany of crises, but the sense that there is no villain, only a constellation of pain, good intentions, and bad outcomes. Cher is not a monster. She is a woman who worked obsessively to provide for her children while navigating a sexist industry that punished women for slowing down. Greg Allman was not a villain. He was a tortured artist whose addiction was a disease, not a choice. And Elijah is not a cautionary tale. He is a human being who was given everything except the one thing every child needs: consistent, unconditional, present love. His story forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. What does it mean to be loved if you are repeatedly sent away? What does it mean to have a mother who fights for you in court, but was rarely there for dinner? The tragedy of Elijah Blue Allman is that he has spent his entire life trying to fill a void that was not his fault. And despite every privilege, every resource, and every second chance, that void remains unclosed. As of late 2025, Elijah is still alive, still fighting, and still fragile. But whether that fight will end in peace or in further tragedy is a question that only time, and perhaps a miracle, can answer.